I mean, I've been, like, modeling and stuff, but, I mean, it's totally not my thing. Like, I just think I'm a nerd, you know? I've been into video games and comic books and stuff. I don't know, I'm such a total nerd.
Hi there, I'm Brian. I'm an actual nerd. I wear these glasses to see. I watch Star Trek, TNG, I play Skyrim. I'm shy. I'm not wearing a nerd costume for Halloween. This is how I actually dress. And when I take these glasses off, I'm not suddenly revealed to be sexy or cool. I'm still a nerd. In fact, I get sick with fear talking to people. I'm not skinny enough to fit into hip jeans. The only reason I'm not very pale and actually have a tan is because I went eventing a couple weeks back and got to dress up and run around in a field. It sucks. I mean, it's... Damn it. Why, a sexy girl who went and saw second week screening of The Avengers is not a nerd. A real nerd is ashamed to be called a nerd. So please, get real. If you're not a nerd, don't call yourself one. Dang it, usually I'm really good at ranting.
Hey everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Watch, Read, Listen. I am your host, David Watson. Sitting across from me, as always, is my co-host,
Duane Watson.
And we're going to take a little bit of a controversial step this week. We're going to be talking about fanboys.
Yay.
And what that looks like in the landscape of today. I'm super excited about it. But as always, Duane, what have you been reading and or listening to?
All right, so this week I actually have things to talk about on the This Week thing. So the first thing is actually a podcast that Shu has mentioned the last couple of times she's been on, and that's Stuff You Missed in History Class, which is part of the How Stuff Works network of things. And they did a two-part series on a guy named Hercules Mulligan.
Okay. First
of all, I want to point out that this man's name was Hercules Mulligan. Second of all, he was a kind of a spy or informant for the revolutionaries during the American Revolution, and is actually credited with saving George Washington's life at least a couple times, I believe. Definitely once, for sure.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and so he was a really fascinating character. Apparently, there's this whole thing with this Hamilton musical that people keep talking about that I have not seen or heard or know anything about.
I actually, I was disappointed. I actually went and looked to see if we had maybe a soundtrack copy at the Target I work at, and I was very disappointed that we didn't have anything, because I was I don't like musicals.
Right.
And I'm actually curious enough to be I actually want to hear this and see this and see what it's about, because I'm actually fascinated enough because I think more of the subject matter that they're doing.
Right. I find it fascinating. And so that's one of the things they were talking about in this podcast is that they already, one of their jokes was that they've already written down all of the characters in Hamilton, so stop sending them in as suggestions for people they need to cover in their podcast.
That's pretty funny. I actually really like that.
Yeah, but I loved it was a great story, so check out Stuff You Missed in History Class for the two-parter on Hercules Mulligan, and also lots of other really cool stuff if you like history. The second thing is, I don't usually end up doing this just because of time. Maybe this will be better in the summer. But of course, one of our favorite podcasts that we've talked about before is The Canon. And they recently did an episode on Marathon Man with Dustin Hoffman and Laurence Olivier.
I've never watched that movie, so I didn't.
Jen and I went and watched it.
Okay.
It is available for free on Roku on a thing called Tubi TV, Tubi TV.
Okay.
Now, here's the caveat. As normally there would be a caveat with anything on the Roku that isn't Netflix or Hulu or Amazon Prime. There are lots of commercials, and they're long, and the audio on them is not mixed correctly, so that you've got one that is really, really quiet and then one that is super, super loud, and the movie's like in the middle. So it's really annoying. You might want to have that mute button ready to go. And it did feel like there was a lot of commercials. Like there's 5 commercials in a break, and the commercials show up every, like, I don't know, 15 minutes or something like that. It's a lot of commercials. But we went ahead and persevered, and we watched the whole thing.
Yeah.
And this movie is really, really good.
Okay.
Obviously.
I mean, what's funny is they even had a debate, because I listened to the episode.
Yeah, I did too.
They had the debate, and Amy Nicholson, I think, is about my age.
Yeah.
And she didn't know the Is It Safe?
See, I didn't know it either.
I did.
Which is funny because
I've heard that it's been referenced in like Simpsons episodes.
Yeah.
Even the Clerks animated series, I think, references it of all things.
Yeah.
So I'd heard it used in references before.
Okay.
And being like the sort of cinephile that I can be,
sure,
I knew where it came from because I researched it, like where it is, or I'd had somebody tell me, oh, that's from Marathon Man.
Mm-hmm.
I've just never watched the movie.
Yeah. But both Jen and I really, really enjoyed it. Find it's very tense.
Yeah. Okay. That might be up my alley then. Cause
I think originally when I first heard, I was like, Marathon Man. I was like, I don't want to watch a movie about Dustin Hoffman running in the 70s.
Yeah.
I have
because it was on Netflix for a while, but it got taken off because it was in my queue. So I had the intentions of watching it.
Yeah.
And then by the time they're doing it for the canon, this always happens to me where I have a movie that they're going to do, and then
it disappears.
It disappears from Netflix, and I'm like, damn. But
yeah, check out Tubi TV if you can stand the commercials. Actually, we kind of we did use the commercials the way we normally use commercials, which is get up and get a drink, or get up and get some ice cream,
take a break,
get up and go.
Maybe
use the
for
restroom.
a movie that's as tense as that, it's probably something that you need.
It can
maybe,
be
to a degree.
Although Jen often expressed, and I agree with her, that you were kind of annoyed because it's like they're getting to something and then suddenly. In a commercial.
Yeah, they do them in that weird way. I've noticed that Hulu can do that with some of the British shows that they do because commercials work differently in England when they make those TV shows. So
there's not built-in commercial breaks.
Right. So they'll cut it odd times. We'll be watching like Misfits or any number of shows that I've watched before, and it does that same thing where you're just like, why did you guys cut to that? That's so strange.
Yeah, so that's but it is available, and I thought that was really cool. The next thing is I meant to mention this on our previous episode because this happened on May 7th, but they had Free Comic Book Day, and I usually don't participate in Free Comic Book Day.
I don't ever have a chance to.
And I almost didn't this time around because I got to Bedrock City Comics on 1960 and Veterans Memorial here in Houston, and I saw that there was a line. And at first I was like, I don't want to stand in line.
Yeah.
Part of the reason I was able just to kind of go ahead and go was because I was already out because I just taught a class, and it wasn't very far.
Yeah.
Basically, it's like get on the Beltway, exit at Veterans Memorial, and then just go up. And it's not so long. So I went ahead and did it. It was kind of a fun, interesting time. They had the School of Rock from the Woodlands there to perform. So there were a lot of these teenagers with acoustic guitars and acoustic percussion and stuff.
Yeah.
And then they were singing songs. And when I first walked in, I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. They're doing some interesting things. You know, they're doing some classic rock and stuff like that. And then I had to laugh as I'm sitting there in line. And this, I don't know how old this kid was, but he was like some, 12, 13, 14-year-old white kid gets up to do Bulls on Parade by Rage Against the Machine. And I was like, this is hilarious. This little kid talking about, Bulls on Parade. But some of the things I got at the Free Comic Book Day, first of all, I got an issue of Bob's Burgers from Dynamite, which I had heard that they had a comic book of, and it's from the creators of. So we're going to check this out and see how it plays. And then, of course, I'm going to pretty much, once I read it, I'm going to give it to y'all, and because I know Shu will enjoy Bob's Burgers.
That's her, that's her jam, too. So
I got on the part that nobody but me in my world cares about is I got an issue of One Punch Man from Viz, which One Punch Man is a manga and an anime about a guy who can defeat enemies in one punch. But actually for us, I think it's really...
I would hope that would be the conceit with a name like One Punch Man. So
it's really...
It'd be strange if it took him
What's kind of cool about it is in manga, they have this whole genre called the shonen show. So in the shonen manga. So that's for young boys, and it's things like your Narutos and your Bleaches and all these things that the most Dragon Ball Z, your most popular shows.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Well, these are really superhero shows, and so they kind of do fit into the idea of comic books and some of the things that we're into.
Right.
And this is actually this is probably more superhero-y than those type of shows, because there actually is like a society of superheroes, and this guy is trying to be a hero, and it's about him being, the type of hero he is.
Okay.
So it's actually more in line with American comic books than it would be with other things. And then on the other side of it was something called My Hero Academia that I have no idea what it is. And then I picked up Suicide Squad, and the only reason I picked up Suicide Squad was because I looked at it and I was like, I know what Suicide Squad is, and I don't know what any of this other stuff is. And then I felt disappointed when I got back and you were like, oh, you should have picked up that 2099 one. And I was like, I didn't even see it, but if I had seen it, I would have totally picked that up instead of Suicide Squad. Not that this is bad, there's definitely nothing wrong with it. It is definitely, Suicide Squad, and there's, it's comic books, it's DC, it's whatever. Things I'm more excited about, though. Love and Rockets is a book that I'd heard about for years. Being a comic book fan and into independent comic books as well, it's kind of one of those things that you heard about, but I never really had a chance to read it.
Right.
So they had a free comic book day version,
which I thought was a rad idea that they did Love and Rockets.
Yeah.
And all things. Yeah. And that's a comic book that I hope people could get into.
Yeah, and I didn't know anything about it, but it has it actually has an explanation of Love and Rockets. It has an introduction thing, and then it talks about because it's by these two brothers.
It's the Hernandez brothers, yes.
Yeah, and then there's actually a third Hernandez brother who has done a little bit of stuff with them as well. And they're kind of two separate things. They're not the same, but it kind of fits with me into something I'm going to talk about a little bit later, which is it reminds me a little bit of like Strangers in Paradise,
right?
And some of the stuff with that, which is one of my favorite comic books ever. The other one I picked up is Drawn and Quarterly. It's called Moon Cop.
Okay,
and it's a Tom Gauld sampler.
Okay,
and this book was so funny. It's like basically it's like comic strips.
Okay,
but they are hilarious, and I thought they were great, and the artwork is kind of my thing. So those are the things that I got at Free Comic Book Day. The other thing that I got, because I was sitting there in line, and you're standing there, and there's a big wall of trade paperbacks.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking at the trade paperbacks and thinking about like things that I might want to, get. And I happened to pass by the Terry Moore section and remembered that I hadn't read Rachel Rising, which is Terry Moore's latest book.
I've heard good things about it, but I've never read it.
Terry Moore is the author and creator of Strangers in Paradise and also Echo, which is a book I need to read. I've got some of it.
Yeah.
But one thing about Terry Moore, his artwork is always amazing. It's so good. I just like looking at it.
It's beautiful looking.
Yeah.
There's a realism that he does, but it's still got that cartoon feeling to it.
Yeah.
So he's drawing realistic women, but they're still a drawing, like a cartooning aspect to it.
Yeah.
I always have this thing with like there's certain artists that I consider to be comic book artists,
right? And
then there are other comic book artists who I consider to be cartoonists.
Yeah.
There's a certain, and people would be like, "What's the difference?" Well, there's a certain aesthetic to a cartoonist that they
like
have.
A Jeff Smith is more of a cartoonist.
Well, like Terry Moore is more of a cartoonist. Somebody like my favorite, Tony Moore. Mm-hmm. The original artist on The Walking Dead. He is more of a cartoonist,
right? Like
they usually are cartoonists. Usually are all encompassing in what they do. Mm-hmm. They're usually inking their own things.
Right.
There's not a superhero aesthetic to what they're doing either.
No,
that's the biggest thing. I think the difference is they were clearly influenced by comic books, mm-hmm. but they're not completely just drawing like superheroes. They're not drawing Jim Lee style or Rob Liefeld style stuff. It's rooted in something different, and usually their influences. If you talk to them, you'll find out their influences are cartoonists.
Yeah, well, and I actually have Terry Moore has done some cartooning work. I've got some of his work that he put out. Now I'm gonna forgotten what it's called. I think it's just called SIP.
Yeah,
actually, which is kind of funny because it's not Strangers in Paradise. It's SIP. Something, and I've gone and forgotten it, but I've got some of those, and some of them are just like strips that he wrote, just ideas like for little comic strips and things like that. Rachel Rising, though, this is really good.
Yeah.
The writing is, I just find it really fascinating. He's put together a storyline that I find very tense. I actually read the first issue of the trade paperback on my tablet through Comixology. I have the first issue of this signed. I got it when it first came out, but I never got the rest of them. I don't think. I've got to go look and see.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, I need to totally get this. And when I got it, I thought I had the first issue, the first trade paperback, and I realized it was the first issue. So I went ahead and got the digital version on Comixology and read through that. And then I read through all of the second issue, or the second trade paperback, I'm sorry, which is, what are we at? So this goes up to issue number 12. So I've read through issue 12.
I'm going to have to borrow that from you.
It's really good.
A shot. I haven't read anything. We're going to try to go, speaking of which, something that I wanted to touch on before we jump into our main topic was the passing of Darwin Cook today.
Yeah, I had that written down.
Incredibly just shocking, because Darwin Cook is one of those creators that, if you were to point a gun to my head, I probably wouldn't name him right off the bat. But his influence has always been there to some degree.
Yeah.
He's a creator that I've always had a tremendous amount of respect for.
Yeah.
And I think he's got a singular voice. And to lose that, anytime we lose a talent like that, and especially in comics, it's very heartbreaking, because they did have a positive influence. The fact that, I was looking through some of his past work that he had done. He started off as a storyboard artist for Batman the Animated Series.
Oh, yeah.
In fact, the one thing I told Christina that really kind of made me kind of go like, oh, he designed and did the opening to Batman Beyond.
Okay, yeah.
That was all his work. And so it was incredibly just kind of like one of those shocking moments, because they had just announced yesterday that he was fighting cancer.
Yeah.
And then to find out that it was pretty much he was...
Well, when I read the announcement and they were explaining the type of care that he was getting, I realized that, this is the end of life kind of thing.
Yeah, it was very... And then people were kind of... There's a lot of comic book creators who I have a tremendous amount of respect to that Darwin had a huge impact on. Ed Brubaker's been talking about it on Twitter.
Yeah.
One of my favorite writers, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for Brubaker's work. They did this whole redesign on Catwoman in the early part of his career. I think it was the early 2000s. And Christina was laughing at me. She says, "You're looking, you're about to cry." I was like, "I kind of am," because he's one of those. I think it's more the fact that he's one of those creators that I just didn't think about.
Yeah.
And so I always never thought about the idea of him not being around, kind of thing. Because I actually got into him through, oddly enough, in it might have been the mid 2000s. Before I got divorced, I know that much. But before I got separated from my ex-wife, was The Spirit. He was doing it, and I was picking up those, and that was kind of really where I got into his stuff, and was looking at his past work on like New Frontier and what he was doing. I know that you said that you picked up. I
got the Parker. They had a sale on Comixology yesterday, and when the tweet went out about it that I saw, it was like, "Hey, go support Darwin Cook. He's here's what happened. He's struggling with this cancer." And I was like, "Oh, I'm totally gonna go. Let me go see." And so when I bought them at the time, I wasn't. I kind of feel like I'm gonna be one of those guys, like one of those kids who listens to Nirvana, in the mid 2000s, and then finds out that and Kurt Cobain is dead. It's already happened.
Yeah.
But I'm going to totally be one of them. This actually will tie in with the whole fanboy idea, because I think sometimes fanboys do this sort of thing. Like when I looked at his artwork, I was like, I've heard his name before a lot, and always positively. When people would talk about, this is a book by Darwin Cook, you should totally go check it out. And then I looked at his artwork, and I'm like, I've totally seen this artwork all over the place, and I love it.
It's distinctive. Like he has, he's one of those artists that. And this is a plus, because it can also sometimes be a negative.
Yeah.
But it's a plus for Darwin Cook, is that he's got a style that you can see a piece by him and know who did it.
Yeah.
And not a lot of comic book artists can say that.
Yeah, he's very distinctive.
Some can. You've got somebody like.
And I had heard about the Parker books. I had heard about them because I was like,
back in the day when I was really
these are totally out
into iFanboy, one of their book of their graphic novel of the year.
Yeah.
Because all three of them were like, this is like the best comic book graphic novel book that you can pick up.
And if you want to pick something up, like again, if you're like us and like money is always a little bit tight, they're like really cheap.
Yeah.
These are usually things that cost you $10
I looked
a
through
piece.
some of his stuff. The Parker books, if you want a physical copy of them, they're like the most expensive one was $15 for the trades.
Yeah.
And that's not a lot of money really in terms of picking up a good trade.
Yeah.
That I know is like, it's a full story. You're not getting 6 issues of a comic book. Like I know with the Parker books, with the Parker books, it's legitimately you're getting a full story in each book, and it's worth doing. The other one I wanted to point out was that they talked about if you want to give something in his name, go contribute to the Hero Initiative. Hero Initiative is helps to provide creators with basically with medical insurance and help with that stuff, because a lot of these freelancers don't have that stuff.
Yeah, I actually heard somebody, I was reading about this, talking about the old Marvel bullpen idea, and people were talking about it in terms of the Marvel movies and how they're kind of going back to this idea, but we forget that like that whole idea that's gone. Like the people who are working for these comic book companies, they're not full-time like employees of the company.
Most of them are freelancers.
They're freelancers, and that means they do not have the best of healthcare and
and a lot of these guys. What's like even funnier is like the guys who've gotten crap, and this will tie into our thing as well. The guys who've gotten crap for say signing on to Marvel as an exclusive or DC as exclusives, the number one thing they'll tell you, they're doing it so that they have consistent healthcare.
Yeah.
Because they don't get it any other way as a freelancer. Yeah. And so that's why the Hero Initiative is something that's incredibly important. If it's not Hero Initiative, think about the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund.
Yep, always.
There's lots of really good companies out there that are in the creators' corners and that need more support, because these are the guys looking out for the standout creators, the guys who are doing this on their own to some degree, or guys who are, maybe not having steady work. They're helping to support those guys. And it's the same thing. I think one that really struck me last year was when they talked about Norm Brayfogle had a, I think an aneurysm, and he was, or a stroke, and he didn't have like medical costs. They were like siphoning off funds. And this is a guy who was a really, really good and well-known comic book artist in the 90s on the Batman titles that I had a tremendous amount of respect for. I didn't have money that I could contribute in any fashion, but I tried my best to like spread the word to people, to be like, if I can't give anything, but I can share stuff and say, hey, this is a cause that's worth giving to, because these guys don't have that. Right. We all think about it because we all have health care if we're working for a quote unquote corporate job. Yeah. In some fashion, not everybody has healthcare, so it's important to me. I only had 2 things for my this week. And one of them is the return of, well, not the return, is the start of the Shockwaves podcast. Launched on the 11th. That's it's the 3 people formerly known as Killer POV. This is their newest podcast. It has a similar format to their previous one, but it's got some cool little added tidbits. One of them is that they're going to do a regular This Week with Ryan Turek. Ryan Turek is a former writer and founder of he was the founder of Shock to You Drop, and he used to write for Dread Central. He's now currently works for Blumhouse in development. Okay. And he actually had a podcast on Geek Nation that hosted Killer POV. He formerly had a podcast with Clark Wolf called The Bloodcast. And they would, and it's actually really good. I recommend checking out The Bloodcast, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for Ryan's point of view on things. But he even has a This Week segment on there, and they're even doing a couple other one and dones, and because of one of those one and dones, they had a guy named Tony Giles on. Tony Giles has a podcast, and they talked about music and vinyl. And Tony Giles actually has a podcast called The Damn Fine Podcast. And The Damn Fine Podcast is him and a friend of his. They are talking about vinyl soundtracks and their recommendations, what to pick up. They're focusing on vinyl reissues as well.
Oh, cool.
And in fact, I think he has a company. I'm drawing a blank on their name, and I even looked him up. But he has a record distribution company that help promote old vinyl soundtracks as well. So it's even, and we'll get that in the link, hopefully in the description notes to today's stuff. But yeah, I recommend that. I think Duane actually would really like it. They've got they got a good chunk of episodes out right now too. I think 50 plus.
Oh, that's well.
So a lot of stuff where they're talking about vinyl. They even do a lot of needle drops, so they give you a feel if you're not sure about purchasing a soundtrack for something. They'll drop in pieces of music to let you kind of get a feel if it's something that you feel like is worth buying. So
that's pretty cool.
So that's all I have for this week. So
all right,
let's take a break real quick, and we'll come back and we're going to talk about fanboys.
And it is believed that on this very spot, Captain James Tiberius Kirk will be born, hence the statue immortalizing him grappling with his most accursed nemesis.
Ricardo Montalban?
Genetically engineered tyrant Khan.
Doesn't look like either of them.
Thank you for pointing that out. That is because the whores at Viacom International threatened to sue us if we use their likenesses, so we make do. Yes, the gentleman in the beige.
I was wondering, what did Sulu find in Captain Kirk's lavatory?
Sulu clearly found a standard issue Starfleet Z-23 personal refuse device.
I believe it was a captain's log.
Very good. A laugh a day keeps the doctor away, everyone. We've been saved. Ooh, any other comic relief? Ah! They're still homeless out there.
Hey!
Yes, what? You? What? Yes.
What is the Klingon translation for "you're gonna die a virgin"?
Rachsilmata. Yeah, that's what, okay. Hilarious, everyone. Looks like we got more Lucas hounds here to mock Roddenberry. Congratulations, gentlemen, but I would like to see your Darth Vader take on one Borg drone. We'll see who's laughing then, am I right?
Darth Vader could put the entire Borg collective in a vice grip with his mind.
Darth Vader has asthma, so name me one Star Trek character with a respiratory disease, because I'm drawing a blank.
Name me one Star Wars character who's gay.
Yeah.
Besides you.
Well, I know it's gay in Star Trek, so why would I even do that?
Captain Picard.
Okay, Captain Picard is not gay, he's British.
Come on, make it so.
Well, I hate to break it to you losers, but Han Solo's a bitch.
Oh, no, he didn't. No, he
I'm sorry, what did you just say? Is there a problem here?
Yeah, there sure is, Spock. The Admiral here just called Han Solo a bitch.
Good one.
It's pretty strong words for a Trekkie.
Okay, a Trekkie is derogatory at this point in the game. Trekker is what we're called now. Trekker.
Oh, sorry. Trekkie.
Let's just take a look, see
What's with the man purse?
Yeah. As I thought, scanner reads douchebag.
All right, guys, and we're back. The subtitle I had for this was called Nerd Smash. But actually, I'm really glad Duane did this because I didn't get to... I have my thoughts on this, but I didn't get a chance to actually... Because of my workload this week, I couldn't sit down and really break down this stuff. So Duane's actually got us as a guide because I think this is a topic that we need a guide because we could go off the rails really fast.
I was thinking about this because I was... when we talk about fanboys, like the term fanboy itself automatically has negative connotations.
Right.
And last time that I'd really like heard somebody going on about fanboys, it was from somebody that we've talked about before on the podcast, and it was Ms. Grace Randolph talking about how she blamed the fanboys in part for they got power and they wanted to express their power for how much they didn't like Batman versus Superman, and so she's using the term automatically like as a negative. It's a pejorative in a sense,
right?
And certainly even the other side of fanboys is of course the fangirl, which it's kind of the gender, these gender terms are kind of funny.
Well, it led to that term that I find it like completely disgusting of the fake fangirl as well.
Oh yeah, and so you have and people talk about fangirling as a verb, something that you can do. So you have this idea of these fans, a very negative kind of pejorative type of term. And so as a person who is a nerd, if you will, who's into a lot of different things that are considered nerdy or geeky, there's sometimes we want to take on the term. We want to be like, yes, I'm totally a fanboy.
Well, it's the idea of embracing like what is considered a negative for people.
Sure.
The idea of embracing that and taking that on. And I think that's really what happened. I think I saw that really happening in like the early 2000s.
Right.
That was really kind of with the launch of the X-Men movies and the Spider-Man movies, which is really where I think for the first time where nerd culture kind of started to come into the mainstream.
Yeah,
for once.
We've mentioned this idea before in talking about comic book movies that when we were kids, the things that we liked were not usually considered like the coolest things ever. People would make fun of you for liking something like Star Wars, for example. Like, people forget that Star Wars wasn't always cool.
Yeah.
Like,
no.
Star Wars, Lord of the Rings was not always cool.
No.
Comic books, not always cool.
No, yeah.
And even when Batman came out in 1989, yeah, everybody had Batman T-shirts.
That was the closest we got to some sort of
Yeah.
mainstream acceptance, but it faded really quickly.
Yeah, it was real quick. And so we think about like this idea of nerd culture as being something nowadays that's mainstream, but at the time it was definitely not as we were growing up. And so I really do understand where some of the negative aspects of fanboy culture come from, because I can see where I might do the same thing and maybe have done the same thing in the past.
And I think the other thing that I think is interesting too is that I think there are certain offshoots.
Yes.
Drew McWeeny for HitFix, he used to formerly write as known as Moriarty on Ain't It Cool, wrote a really good editorial where he talked, why are nerds so angry?
Yeah.
We won the culture war, essentially. We are mainstream for
Yes.
once. I was like, guys who and he's much older than us. He's about 10 years older than I am. He was even saying, I fought against that. I hid my nerdiness when I was in school, and now he's like, now I can celebrate it, and I have kids, and I can celebrate this, the fact that we won. So why are we so angry?
That's a good point. And so I think I love that idea that why does the angry fanboy now such a thing? And so I wanted to break this down into basically 4 points. And they're all kind of interrelated to each other. So it's not like they're necessarily 4 separate points, but I think it's good to kind of look at this way.
Right.
And the first one really, I think, is like the heart of the matter. And that is that fanboyism, if you want to call it that, divides everybody into different tribes.
Right.
It becomes like what the classic nerd, myself included, would say why we don't like sports so much. It doesn't make any sense to me why a person who is a Cowboys fan and a person who is a Redskins fan, why they should have such a negative impression of each other. It didn't make any sense to me.
Because they enjoy the same.
Yes.
They enjoy the same sport.
Yeah, it's like you're both football fans.
Yeah, well, you
can't
want your
just be
team to
football
win.
fans.
Yeah, and that's something that I agree with that too, because that's something that I think the most like pertinent example we can give in this half so far of 2016 is Marvel versus DC.
Right, exactly.
It's the brand loyalty.
Yes.
And it's been that way across all those things. I kind of looked at your list. I was like, there's everything in there.
Yeah, so I started off talking about stuff that is from my personal perspective. So, again, as I mentioned before, I'm kind of like the resident manga anime nerd.
Yeah.
Well, in the manga and anime communities, first of all, there is the manga versus the anime community.
Right.
Where people are like, well, I just read manga. And other people are like, well, I don't read manga. I just watch anime. And I'm like, you're both kind of watching like the same. To me, it's like the same thing.
Yeah.
Like, why are you so separate about it? But some people are very much like, no, we have to be either a manga or an anime person. But then outside of that, then you have the people who are manga versus comics. So, for example, this goes back to this old thing that people have about calling things that they like. In the manga community, there's this thing where if you like it, it's manga, and if you don't like it, then it's comics. And it doesn't make any sense because, of course, when I was growing up, manga was just comic books from Japan.
Yeah, that's what it is, isn't it?
Right. Well, you would think so.
Yeah.
But then Tokyo Pop, the company who published a lot of manga, wanted to start creating their own stuff because it was cheaper, and so they had to get these English-speaking people to create quote-unquote manga because the kids wouldn't buy it if it was called comics. So they came up with something they called OEL manga, or Original English Language Manga.
Wow.
That isn't manga because it's not from Japan, right?
Okay. Because
there was this idea that if you didn't call it manga, if you called it comics, then it wasn't cool, and we don't like it because it's not manga. In the anime versus,
sounds like you like a word versus another word.
It is. The word came to mean something different. The same thing with anime. There's a debate out there, and we'll go look up some YouTube videos on this if you really want to. I'll put a link to one in the show notes. But this idea is something like Avatar: The Last Airbender or The Legend of Korra are those anime, because some kids call them anime, and I'm like, they're not anime. They're not originally from Japan, written originally in the Japanese language for a Japanese audience. So what I decided to do is just stop calling anything anime and really just say like cartoons, because there's cartoons from Japan, and there's cartoons from America, and there's cartoons from France,
And they're just cartoons.
they're just cartoons. It's just animation.
That's what it is. Well, the same thing happened with especially in the 80s, and this is something that really came about because of like the two seminal works in comic books are Alan Moore's Watchmen and Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns. And we started calling them graphic novels.
Yes.
And something that's really even fascinating is because it's funny that Alan Moore kind of he didn't help coin the term graphic novels,
but it was
the term graphic novels was coined by Will Eisner. But Will Eisner was legitimately making what would essentially be a graphic novel. He was making a long form work that you were to sit down and read.
Yes.
It wasn't published in these little digest formats, what we know as comics. But it's all comics at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And so for the longest time, comic book audiences, the comic book audience, the comic book fanboys, whatever you want to call them, they treated comics as a dirty word.
Yes.
Where they had it's high art, so it's
a graphic
it's
novel.
a graphic novel.
Yeah, don't call it comics.
And then it actually took me, like, I kind of had that. I was really bad about that for a little bit. And then I read a really great interview with Alan Moore where he was just kind of like, it's comics. Don't be ashamed of it, of what it is.
Yeah.
It is what it is.
Yeah.
If you're reading it in like 22 pages in a digestible format like that, it's comics.
Yeah.
If you're reading it in a long form, it's still comics.
It's all good.
Unless the original intention of the work was to read it as a graphic novel, then it's comics.
Yeah, and you also see this again, like in the comic book industry. There's the mainstream comic book fan versus the independent comic book fan. So, like, if you're really into
Indie
Love and Rockets, or even like ElfQuest, for example, something that I've never read, and every time I look at it, I'm like, yeah, I don't really like the artwork, and so I'm just not going to read this.
I have a tremendous amount of respect for how long it's run in the industry.
Oh yeah. I mean,
I've never had
I respect
desire
it.
to read it.
Yeah, but I look at it, and I'm like, I don't think so. But and not only that, but there's fanboys who would say, "Oh, are you a person who enjoys the writing, or are you a person who enjoys the artwork?" And this is true for manga as well. And it's like, if you like the artwork, well, we're going to look down on you because you like the pretty thing and versus the serious thing of the writing.
They should work in harmony with one another to fit the story. But that's.
And then you have to point out that this is not a new thing. Like, this isn't something that nerds just suddenly started doing in the 2000s. There's the old SF versus sci-fi thing, where if you are a sci-fi fan, that means you like things like Star Wars and Battlestar Galactica and Robbie the Robot and stuff like that. And if you're an SF fan, that means you like hard science fiction, like Isaac Asimov's Foundation trilogy, or Kim Stanley Robinson's Martian books.
You can't like all those things.
Well, apparently not. See, and that's the thing, right?
This sounds like the punk metal argument.
It is. It's the same thing. Music nerds are just as tribalistic as culture nerds. I mean, it doesn't really matter. This even goes back to people who like Shakespeare versus Christopher Marlowe, and people who will be like, I'm totally a Shakespeare fan, or I'm totally a Marlowe fan.
I didn't even know that was a thing at all.
Yeah, people who are Marlowe fans are always like, well, I like Christopher Marlowe, and they're like, and because they're like, you just like that mainstream Shakespeare, and it's like, this is true.
That sounds like somebody who deserves to be punched in the face. I'm just saying that on the record right now. That is seriously one of the worst arguments. And we're talking about something that, like, really and truthfully, all these arguments probably people deserve to be punched in the face for them.
Right.
Because it's incredibly just like splintering in a way that we don't need to be splintered.
Right. I think what we need, so this is the worst part of fanboyism, is this idea that we're going to divide everybody into tribes, and you can only like the one thing. And you can't like Star Trek and Star Wars.
Yeah. And I seem to remember that kind of came, and I think I talked about it on the last episode where I said I was going to bring my personal experiences.
Yeah.
When I got into film as a cinephile, it was the idea of art versus trash, and I could be I always think I could be completely snobby. In fact, Shu will even tell you that I was.
Yeah.
I looked down on people who didn't like a movie that I didn't like, or vice versa. And it took me. I had to grow and realize that people like what they like.
Yes.
Now, can a movie be bad? Sure.
Yeah.
But people can still enjoy it, and that's where you have to learn the divide. It's like I could argue till I'm blue in the face why a movie like BVS is not good. or is just a good movie and not a masterpiece, or is just an okay movie and not a masterpiece. But it'd be falling on deaf ears, even if I actually have a legitimate argument to make with that.
Yeah, because people are going to like what they like.
They're going to like what they like.
It's like I can't go to a lot of my students who really like R&B and hip hop and stuff and explain to them why no, what you should really like is punk music. It's not going to work.
Yeah.
What I did, however, do is realize that a lot of the punk music that I like, it's not like high art.
No,
I have to
it's
sit there
not.
and admit that I can totally like sing along to MXPX's punk rock show, and I know all of the words to punk rock show, and I love that song. It's not high art. It's
No.
not like this amazing.
Well, it depends on what your definition
visceral
of.
experience.
That's where you get into the idea of, if you take it out of the fanboy context, that gets into the idea of what is high art.
Yeah, I mean,
Does high art exist, or is all art high if it's in your eyes is good enough to be what it is?
well, because even in the art community, there's people who you're like,
because I think like there's stuff where I'm like, you see a piece of, using the art example, you
Mm-hmm.
see something and you're just like, it's lines,
Yeah.
and it's very crude, and it's very, you're like, and this person has this, they've somehow managed to manufacture a deep meaning behind it, and you're like,
Right.
that's garbage. I'm
I
sorry,
think-
that is what that is. You can I could come up with any kind of reason as to why
Yeah.
you think that's high art. I don't think it is, because you happen to have put some sort of high meaning behind
Yes.
it. That doesn't mean anything.
well, and then you even have in the artistic community itself, it becomes like, well, if you think that technical skill is what really matters, oh well, then you're just like a pedant, or not a pedant, but you're just some lowly, non-artistic person. And the fact that you can't understand why. We actually literally saw this when we were at the Woodlands Art Festival. There was a picture, and it was a white canvas,
Uh-huh.
and then it was a slightly darker white, like an off-white line across it,
Okay.
and they wanted to sell it for like several $1,000s.
No.
And I was like,
That's
that
not art.
is crap. What I like are the pictures that look pretty.
Well, here's the thing. Well, that's the thing. That people forget this too. The technical prowess, 9 times out of 10 means
Yeah.
that person is probably as creative
Yeah.
in that, because they've worked and they've honed their craft.
Yes.
So they take it
They go hand in
seriously.
hand to me.
And then they add that to their creativity. Like, I
Yes.
see that a lot of times where there's a lot of really good. It's like the so. There's a lot of good comic book artists who probably aren't good writers, but they've honed their craft so they can tell a
Yeah.
story in panels.
Yes.
So they might not be a great writer, though.
Yeah,
They
which
can-
is, by the way,
but
one
they
of
can
the
tell
things-
a story.
Yeah.
So if they have a good writing partner, they can tell a story in a fundamental way with two people coming together who have that craft.
Which reminds me too, talking about people, in terms of craft, like something like Terry Moore. One thing that if you read his books, you'll notice that compare it to like a modern comic book, and there's a lot more quote unquote silence. There's not so many words all the time.
Yeah.
And that's also
yeah.
one of the things I appreciate about manga as well, is the fact that a lot of times it's just panels and there's not
Yeah.
very much dialogue.
It's craft and all that other stuff coming together.
So that's the first thing I had, was this idea of dividing. We're to divide everybody up. So you can be like a Lord of the Rings fan, or you're a Song of Ice and Fire fan. Like, it becomes this whole thing. The second thing that's related to this is this idea of people in fandom being gatekeepers, which is something that has a couple different levels to it. One of the major levels that we have, of course, is what you were just talking about, was this idea of the fake fangirl or the fake geek girl.
Right.
Stereotype, or I don't even know if it's not even a stereotype, because stereotypes actually come from reality. So
Right.
it's just a fake, like a just a thing.
You
that
can't
somebody
question
made.
what somebody like loves, and this is something that
Right.
I've had a conversation. I can use this as what turned Christina off to mainstream superheroes, is
Right.
the idea that, oh, you're a girl, you can't like this stuff.
Exactly.
So it's the automatic idea that we could have gotten. Like, she's a person who could be into superhero comics.
Yeah.
And she loves comic books. Don't get me wrong.
Right.
But she has no desire to read superheroes, because at some point in her age, she was told that she couldn't because she was a girl.
Yes.
So
And I've never.
and that's why I hate the term fake fangirl, because it's like, people like this stuff.
Yeah.
And they can like this stuff. And just because they don't know every single little minutia that you know,
Right.
doesn't make them not fans of this stuff.
Yes, and I think this is something that
That's where it's like, it's the ball, like, who knows more?
Yeah, and I know that as a both a nerd and also a bit of a know-it-all, because I am, and I'll own that. it becomes the sort of thing like, for example, if I find somebody who really, really likes Alice in Wonderland, the Disney movie from the 1950s, and I'll be like, well, did you know? And then go into it all about it because I've read Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass like multiple times, and Lewis Carroll's one of my favorite authors ever.
Right.
And so I know all of this stuff about him, and so I want to tell you about it.
Yeah.
The negative side of that becomes when it becomes a way of excluding people from your group.
Right.
It's like, oh, instead of like us like talking about how great Alice in Wonderland is, now it becomes you can't join my group because you don't know enough about this.
Yeah.
And
that's something that people have to watch out for too.
Yeah, and so we see this, of course, in A Song of Ice and Fire fans treating Game of Thrones fans as if they're lesser.
Right.
Like, oh, well, you just like the TV show, so that must mean you like crap. Well, like, let's be honest. Like,
people
both
like
the
what
show,
they like.
people like what they like, and also the show. Yeah, we'll talk more about this at some other point in time with some other people, but it has problems. But the books have problems too, and just because you read one first and then you like that one better doesn't mean that the other one is automatically crap, and that people who like that need to be kept.
Well,
out
yeah,
of the
that
fandom.
comes down to adaptation. I have a lot of friends who had an issue because I like the V for Vendetta movie,
Sure,
to a degree.
right.
I have issues with it,
Right.
because there are points to the actual original comic series that I feel that it loses in translation.
Right.
But that's my problem. You know, the movies, the people who love that movie, well, they
Yeah.
can love it. Like me trying to sit there and tell them how I think that thematically it misses points in the movie versus
Right.
the comics. I mean, I could talk till I'm blue in the face, but it's like they still love that thing.
Yeah.
I'm not going to change their mind on it.
Yeah. And it's the sort of thing where you could be building.
That was an issue that I had to get past as I learned about adaptation, where you have to accept that things are not going to be the way they are.
Yes.
It's really funny because I talked about the Drew McQueenie post. Somebody tried to make a counterpoint that, well, if comics were just treated respectfully and basically were translated in full from comic to movie, then maybe fanboys wouldn't be so angry. Well, no, you're missing the point of adaptation. Apparently, you don't understand how these things work.
Yeah.
And I didn't comment on it because I didn't want to. It was on another friend's post.
Sure.
I'll tell you in private who it was.
Yeah.
And I was like, but you're missing the point of what adaptation is then.
Yeah.
That's your fault. You don't understand that not everything has to translate 100% from comic books to the screen. One of the things that I'm excited about, and probably if it had been announced 10 years ago, some of the changes they made that I probably would have been angry about is Preacher.
Yeah.
I'm actually super excited for the adaptation because I trust the people who are involved.
Yes.
And I trust the fact that it's not going to be the comic.
Yes.
In fact, I don't want it to be the comic anymore. I've read the comic. My other argument to people who have issues with this, the comic exists. Sit
Yeah.
down, read it.
Yeah. It's not ruined.
It's not ruined because of you don't happen
No.
to like the changes that Hollywood made.
Yeah. And I think that speaking of one of the things that got me over my adaptation thing, because this is definitely something that I struggled with, both as a Lord of the Rings fan and as a fan of other things that were adapted. For example, I really have like Starship Troopers, for example. Robert Heinlein is one of my favorite authors, and I really liked Starship Troopers as a kid. And then when I saw the movie, and I was like, they ruined Starship Troopers, and I was like, and I realized that I've gone and forgotten Paul Verhoeven, right?
Yep.
That Verhoeven was doing something completely different, and that his Starship Troopers wasn't my Starship Troopers, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But what got me over not specifically Starship Troopers, but over the adaptation thing, was when I was listening to the Riddles in the Dark podcast, which was by the Tolkien professor, and they were going through The Hobbit and talking about how it could be adapted and all the changes that would need to be made. And when you're talking about it from a standpoint of, let's not like talk about, oh, isn't it so sad that they're going to have to change all this stuff. Instead, let's think about like you're moving from book to film. What has to change?
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of weird.
There are differences in story and pacing that are going to work well in a book that aren't going to work well in a movie.
And I think
vice versa.
What's funny about it is it made me, as much as the Hobbit movies have problems, I ended up appreciating them more than I would have otherwise, because I wasn't looking at it as you're ruining this book. It was a different sort of creative endeavor, and so even though I can be like very critical of them and say like you made some major missteps as we go through this whole thing, I ended up appreciating a lot more of what they did. So I think that the whole, but if I let that be like, oh no, you don't like the book, or you didn't read the book, so I'm just going to keep you out of my group, I think it's a problem. Second thing, or third thing, number 3. I can't remember where I got this term from, and I thought I remembered it, and then I realized that I didn't remember it. There's this idea of, I don't know if you've heard this, but cheer pressure. Have you heard this idea? Okay, so this is the idea that in fandoms, or in any group, there's this pressure to always talk positively about the thing.
I get the okay, there you go. Like, I've seen it in action. I've never heard the term before.
I heard somebody on a podcast I listened to, and now I've gone and forgotten which one it was, use that term. And this is the idea that if you make any sort of criticism of it, whatever, people to jump on you and try and tear you apart. And you can definitely see this with Batman versus Superman.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
There's a contingent that feels like if you made any criticism of BVS at all, that means you're a terrible person and you should feel bad.
Well, yeah, no, that's the other thing too. That it's been I don't know all 4 of your points, but I'll bring it up here.
Fine.
Is that making comparisons. So what we did a huge thing within our Civil War episode to not talk about BVS and to talk about Civil War on its own merits.
Yes,
because apparently Batman v Superman fans can't handle the idea that two movies that have similar themes, that feature antagonisms between their main characters, can't be compared.
Right.
Well, you don't know what criticism is then.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing that's been bothering me about the whole thing is the divide between critics and fans. Is automatically like, sorry, but when somebody attacks, I'll use him, we've talked about him before because we both kind of like his work. Somebody attacks Devin Faraci. Well, he's a fan of these works. He understands these characters. He's written enough editorials about his love for comic books and DC characters that there's an issue that he has with the movies because they legitimately aren't even trying.
Yes. And
so that's the other thing, too, is like there's a difference between what Marvel can do in taking and shifting things around in the characterization, but they get the themes of those characters correct.
Right.
And make them fit within the universe, whereas Zack Snyder does not know how to handle Superman whatsoever.
Yeah, and I think that it's one of those things that makes me sad about the whole Batman vs Superman Man of Steel thing is I was on board with where Man of Steel was. I was like, I'm totally good with this. And then you didn't take it where I thought you should have taken it. But that doesn't mean that I can't be critical of Batman versus Superman. I have to be critical of it. Just because I love comic book movies doesn't mean I can't
it's merit as a movie.
This is terrible.
And its merit as a movie doesn't work.
Right.
And I think I made this comment to you a couple days ago where I said, it's funny because if you go back and listen to the BVS special report, I said the movie's okay.
Yeah.
And actually, because of the way the vehemence in which I guess the idea of DC cheer pressure has gone almost psychotically overboard, that it's made me almost hate the movie a little more than I did. Because that's a natural, that's like I said, that's a me issue. That's not necessarily, well, it is the DC fanboys issue because they're the ones who are basically like, it's a masterpiece. It's the idea that they're doing the same thing we talked about kind of earlier. They're trying to say, oh, you didn't get it. No, fuck you. I got it.
Yeah.
It's just not good.
Yeah. And this is, again, talking about related to this idea is this failure to be critical of the things.
Right.
And when I say critical, I don't mean to tear things down, but I mean
to
be a critical thinker.
Well, yeah, it's like me sitting there making I think like when I was thinking about Civil War, about all the things that I enjoyed, but sitting there really trying to look at what didn't work. Well, so in being able to point out things that didn't work for me and being okay with those, it doesn't ruin the movie for me because I didn't like these particular things.
Yeah, and I put this down. One of the things that people do, and I haven't watched Batman vs Superman again, and I won't watch it again until it comes out on whatever form it comes out on. I'm assuming Blu-ray of some sort. I'll probably buy it.
Yeah, I'll buy I already said I'll buy the R-rated cut.
But
and give it a shot.
One of the things that people get confused, and I think this is what I think. This is a complete hypothesis that's unsupported by another viewing of this movie. I think part of what's going on is that Batman vs Superman includes what we call fan service. Right now, fan service is a term that I first encountered in relationship to manga and anime. And while fan service does not have to be this way, it can be very varied. One of the common ways that fan service is included in manga and anime is you have a normal storyline with just normal characters, but the girl character has enormous breasts, and they bounce everywhere because guys like enormous breasts.
Right.
They don't do anything besides bounce around and be there to look at. So that's the idea behind fan service. But fan service can be for anything. Fan service could be the transformation scene in a shoujo anime like Sailor Moon or something like that, where it's like it's all pretty and sparkly and it's cool clothes because girls like cool clothes or whatever. And in Batman vs Superman, I think what you're seeing a lot of is reaction to fan service. They're like, did you see the cool scene where the thing happened that was cool? That scene, that was really cool.
Yeah.
Now, all movies,
well, they feature to some degree.
They're all going to have fan service. When you see, when Iron Man says, "Hey, Underoos," and then Spider-Man shows up,
that's fan service line.
That's fan service.
We know,
it totally is.
We get the Underoos context of that line. Yeah. It's still funny, but
him showing up in that movie in that way is fan servicey. The problem is when fan service is just included, and that's really all that it is fan service.
Yeah, it doesn't serve any point.
Yes, and what I find from fanboys is that there's a tendency to be like, they're just so caught up on the cool thing that happened that was cool that they lose all the rest of their critical.
Well, that's what I've noticed is happening, and that's
ability.
why people are going to complain because it keeps coming back around to BVS. But that's the most current thing that's happening right now with this is that they literally can't. Like, I've yet to see a single person who can't give me a legitimate reason why this is good.
Yeah.
Like, seriously, I've never seen somebody go beat for beat why they think this is actually a good movie.
Yes.
They can tell me they can tell me there are things that are good in it.
Sure.
But that does not, but the parts do not equal the whole.
No.
So Ben Affleck being really good as Batman, and he is.
Yeah.
In this movie.
We've already said it before.
Does not equal a good movie. Mm-mm. That's a part of the movie that's good. The movie fails in its the way it tells its story.
Well,
it doesn't earn its main character's death.
Right.
It doesn't do any of these things.
No.
I saw somebody who was like, I cried at the end of Batman v Superman. I was like, how? Because there's nothing in this film as a movie that gives you that response.
Yes, and I think that to give you an example of something that is fan servicey that I liked, all the Wonder Woman stuff in Batman vs Superman is essentially fan service, and the reason it's fan service and it's not character, because I would compare what happens in Wonder Woman with you could compare the Wonder Woman stuff in Batman vs Superman with Spider-Man or Black Panther in Civil War, and I'm not going to spoil anything about it.
Those characters have arcs
because they're in the movie, and they could have been exactly the same way that Wonder Woman is used in Batman vs Superman, which is she shows up and she does some cool stuff.
Yeah.
But you don't really know anything about her at the end of it. It's just, did she look cool? And can I get behind the idea?
It's the same as the Files.
Yeah.
Well, you know these symbols, so that's why you get those things.
Yeah, why are those symbols there? Because of fan service.
Yeah.
Because Lex Luthor invented the logos for all the characters.
Because why would anybody actually do that?
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
And that's why we know it's fan service, because it's like, well, you know those, so that's what makes it cool.
Yeah.
Like you said,
wouldn't it?
The cool thing is cool because I recognize
this
it.
Is what would be more. This is what would be more realistic. Is you have file folders, instead of pictures you have names, and the names say Fish Guy, Fast Dude, Strong Chick, and Metal Dude. Yeah, Crazy Metal Dude Man. That would be more realistic. And you'd be like, and the fans would be like, oh, hey, Fish Dude is totally Aquaman.
Yeah.
And that would have been
There's
cool.
a way to play that off, yeah.
But they don't. They throw that in there just to have you be into that. And so those are really my main points, although I did have a number 5 as I was thinking about it, and that was the nitpicking about the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Because this is the Lord of the Rings fan, as a Lord of the Rings fan, who says, well, I hate Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings movies because they don't have Tom Bombadil in them.
Right.
And I love Tom Bombadil. He's amazing. He has a blue coat and yellow boots and red pants or something like that. And it's amazing. And he sings songs all day. And
he doesn't work in a movie.
No. If you saw that guy show up, you'd be like, who is this bozo? This is crazy.
This went off the rails somehow.
Yeah.
No, but there's a lot of that goes on, and that's kind of where I think people. I really think with BVS, if I'm turning it back to that argument with fanboys, is that because right now they're probably some of the most disgusting fanboys on the internet right now.
Yes,
are DC fanboys.
Yeah.
Not all of them. I won't lump them all into one group. Some of them are
not.
very reasonable.
Yes,
they like the thing they like. They realize it has problems. It's the ones who are. If you called BVS a masterpiece, you do not know how to watch movies.
No,
and I'm sorry, you don't.
No,
Grace Randolph.
So. Yeah, I think
somehow I'm gonna keep sneaking her name.
I think what really
I don't even know what she thought of Civil War because I was like
I don't know. I unsubscribed from her YouTube channel.
She kind of was damned if she did, damned if she didn't, because she kind of set it up to where if she did like Civil War, the thirsty DC fanboys who were kind of trying to build her up because somehow they thought that, oh, she's cute, maybe I'll get some leg, I'm scoring some points. There's a bunch of thirsty dudes on Twitter who are like, they are like in her corner because she's a cute chick.
Can I just say that I hate that term?
Reason.
By the way.
Which one?
I hate the word thirsty.
Oh no!
That term so much.
It's it makes sense.
But I get it. I totally get it.
So.
Which is again going back to this idea, like
it's actually the fact that I don't know a better way to describe it. Desperate dudes.
They're desperate. And this is one thing that I want to like kind of just to tie this all together is that this idea that we should be inclusive as fandoms. We should welcome people in. I never did understand why there would be such a thing as a fake geek girl or a fake fangirl, because they're girls.
Well, it's just the idea that
and when I was growing up, there weren't.
About this. So, it's that it's inclusive, but also like for instance, like what about with critics as well? Because critics are fans.
Yeah, I mean,
you're automatically
like a person doesn't become a movie critic because they're not fans of movies.
Yeah,
at least you would hope not.
I would. Rex Reed might be, but
I'm sure there's people who hate movies.
I'm sure
there's people who hate movies who make a living at it, and there's people who hate plays who make a living. But for the most part, people become critics of these things because they enjoy the thing. Yeah. Now it's completely fair that somebody. Like a Roger Ebert, for example, doesn't always get things because he was an old. Is he still alive?
He's dead. He's been dead for 2 years.
But when he was, I forgot because then I forget about the other guy, and then I'm like, I don't remember.
Gene Siskel's been dead for a long time.
I know because I'm like, I know Siskel's dead for sure, but then I forget. So my point is that it's okay. Like definitely, Ebert was not a fan of comic books, not a fan of video games, not a fan of stuff like that. And he didn't get stuff.
But sometimes he would admit that too, though.
Yeah, and that's fair.
It's not his cup of tea.
But when you have people,
and that's legitimate criticism.
Yeah, and when you have people like Devin Faraci who really understand comic books, who are writing smartly about comic books in the movies and how they're adapted, then you just need to listen to it and be like and learn something from it, because that's amazing to have those people out there. Yeah. Because we did not have those people 30 years ago.
No, we didn't.
So I wish people would just be a little bit more inclusive and welcoming.
I tried to. I could have come into this episode really angry at those people, but I wouldn't be serving any purpose by being angry about it. I'm the same. I'm a different side of the same coin. Yeah. But so I'm not doing any good. So to really kind of look at this in a level-headed fashion and go like, these are things that make people not take us seriously. Yes. Because they see you getting really, really upset because people didn't like the movie that you like. Yeah. Well, that's fine. People aren't going to. The debate. Yesterday was Friday the 13th. Mm-hmm. So just to give you an idea, we record these on Saturdays usually. Yesterday was Friday the 13th. All throughout the day, I'm seeing people ranking their favorite Friday the 13th movies. Yeah. And they're not all the same. No. And that's okay. Yeah. There is no definitive way of doing that.
Let me just explain how I hate you because you like this number.
Hey, I'm a huge admitted fan of Jason X. But I understand what Jason X is. I'm not going to sit there and go like, Jason X is a great movie. You don't understand why it's not a great movie. Yeah. No, Jason X is a bad movie that I enjoy. Right. And I get why it's a bad movie, but I enjoy it because it knows what it is as well. Yes. So that's the thing people need to realize sometimes, It's like Batman and Robin. I saw somebody try to defend Batman and Robin. I'm like, I don't get how you could definitively do that's a bad movie. And maybe you can enjoy it. Maybe. But I don't see that happening.
No. Because I listened to a podcast about it and I got bored listening to the podcast about it.
Yeah, I did. The Hero Movie Podcast did an episode on it, and it's like, it's fun. It's fun when comedians are involved.
That would be better, probably.
Because they can actually legitimately make fun of the movie and how bad it is.
So, with that said, I think that's kind of it. So,
if you want to do some more reading, like I said, I would definitely check out a lot of articles on that. Devin Faraci actually had an excellent article called "I Am Bias,"
Okay.
in which he talks about how every person, you can't call a critic biased because every person is biased when they walk into a movie. You can't.
Yeah.
And he talks about how it is almost impossible to objectively watch a movie.
Yeah.
You are bringing your
Well, I'm not even going to get into the fact that that's a whole thing in the anime community.
you're
about.
bringing your baggage into whatever work of art you are viewing or looking at
Yeah.
or reading. You have baggage already. You're going to bring your biases into that.
Yep.
And it's a great article. It's on Birth Movies Death. I actually wrote, I think
so.
interesting article called is it Critics v Fans or Fans v Critics?
One of those. I'll link it to the show
It's
notes.
The Dawn of Misunderstanding, in which I talk
Yes.
about how about people not understanding the early. It's really about the early release of Civil War and
Yes.
why the reviews were different and what they meant
Right. Exactly.
about confidence that a movie studio has in their product sometimes
Yes.
too. And you can read that on watchreadlisten.net. We are every day at Watch Read Listen Podcast on Facebook. Watch Read Listen Podcast at gmail.com is where you can always reach us.
Yep.
Send us your feedback, your thoughts.
Yeah,
And we're on Twitter.
Yeah, WRL podcast, and I've been wanting some more of that feedback and stuff like that.
To the point where we're going to start begging you guys.
Stuff coming up. We have at the end of the month, shoes all booked up.
That should be launching on the Color
Magic.
of Magic. Next month, too, they're actually going to be, they've already decided they are doing Alice in Wonderland.
Yep. So it should be
So-
cool.
That's two things to look forward to as on top of our weekly podcast that we're going to keep launching to you guys. Go show her some love. It's I think it's all booked up on Facebook, and then it's ABU underscore podcast on Twitter. So check it. Go give her some love, some shout outs. She would appreciate it. So I mean, that's all we got for this week. Tell us what you guys think, and we'll see you next week on the show.
Bye.
Thank you for visiting Watch.Read.Listen. I did it!
Yay!